Thank you so much. It's a huge pleasure for me to be back in Melbourne. This is now my 5th visit, and it gets better every time, and it's really a delight for me. What I want to talk about tonight is, I want to begin really by talking about my approach in all of my books. And, in all of my books, what I'm looking for, in a sense, is guidance, is tips on how I and all of us can live in troublesome areas of life, because it's never seemed obvious to me how we get through this life. It seems to present all sorts of challenges, and weirdly there's a lot of silence around what some of these challenges are. So I looked at different disciplines. I've looked at different disciplines for clues on how we might live a better, more fulfilling, less painful life. I looked at philosophy in the consolations of philosophy. I looked at literature in how Proust can change your life. I looked at the visual arts and architecture in the architecture of happiness, and so on. And a few years ago, it struck me that there is a resource that is a provider of wisdom and consolation and an ethical framework, and that's rather fascinating and has dominated the mental landscape of human beings for thousands of years. I'm thinking, of course, of religion. The problem is, I'm an atheist. Not just a bit of an atheist, I really am an atheist. I don't have any spiritual longings. I never ask myself, is there something out there? I'm unsentimental towards a lot of these questions. I'm very aware of all the horrors that have gone on in the name of religion. So this doesn't, in a way, make me an ideal candidate to write about religion, but at some point it did strike me that religions cannot be in the words of Christopher Hitchens, the source of the poison of everything. It's implausible. They've been around for thousands of years. They reflect the collaborative intelligences and sensitivities of millions of people, and the idea that everything to do with them is false and wicked just didn't start to stand up to the scrutiny that I applied to it as I thought more about the subject. So that's really the fruit of my thinking, and my new book, Religion for Atheists, is a deliberate attempt to look at a number of areas where I believe that religions have things to offer for non-believers. I mean, perhaps believers know about these things already, but for non-believers, I wanted to look at that. It strikes me that at the moment the world is really divided into believers and non-believers, and the debate has become at times very fierce. There are people, some of whom live in North Oxford, who've suggested not only that religion is unbelievable, but also that it's ridiculous, and that people who believe in anything are simpletons, maniacs, people who must be lectured at to remove the folly of their intellectual errors. That's not really my approach. I think such an approach is sterile. I don't think one makes progress. I've been in many debates where on the one hand you've got the religious feeling very sorry for the atheists that they're going to go to hell, and on the other hand you've got the atheists feeling very sorry for the religious that they're so stupid. It doesn't strike me that this is really a productive way to go forward. So let me lay out my stall really simply, and if you don't like it, please leave quietly now. I won't hold it against you, but I'm going to lay out my stall, and my stall is, of course, there's no God. Now, let's full stop, that's it. I'm not going to discuss that bit of it anymore. As far as I'm concerned, there just is no God. But I think, rather than that being the beginning of a massive debate on the existence or non-existence of God, I think that's really a sideshow to a much more fundamental issue that I believe that we tonight, but perhaps more broadly, we as a society need to tackle, which is, where do you go once you think that actually perhaps there is no God? How do you live a good life outside of a religious structure? This is the question facing modern society, and we haven't necessarily answered it that well. I think it's a legitimate question, and my book is an attempt to answer that question. My starting point is to say that we should learn to steal from religions. Now, stealing is not generally a nice thing to do, but I think when it comes to looking at the field of religion, we shouldn't feel that commitment is everything. Some people have accused me of advocating a pick and mix approach to religions. And I say, you know what? You're absolutely right. That's completely what I'm doing. Pick and mix approach. Some people have said religions are not a buffet from which you can go around choosing the best bits. And my answer is yes, they are. And that's precisely what I'm doing. So I've taken my plate and I've gone around the different faiths and I've done precisely that. Now, I can understand that if you're a committed Catholic or Buddhist, this attitude will seem impious. And it's easy to accuse such a person of flightiness and, as I say, lack of commitment. But once you start to look at the world through agnostic or atheistic eyes, and you start to recognize that works of that religion are essentially works of man, they're cultural works, then it makes no more sense to think that you have to be committed to one religion and one strand than it does to say that one has to be committed to one kind of music or one kind of literature. Imagine if you liked the Beatles and somebody said, right, so you like the Beatles, you've got to listen to everything all the time, even those slightly weird albums, and you can't deviate, and no Joni Mitchell and no Whitney Houston for you. That would seem bizarre. We naturally accept a pick and mix approach to culture. You can read Jane Austen, but you can also read Michael Crichton or whatever. You can shift across things, and we accept that at different points we will require different things. I think the same holds true for religion, so this is a buffet, and I'm going to take you now through some of the things that I'm going to put on my plate, but really the book is an attempt to get you thinking. There will be things that are not on my plate that you want to put on yours, and that's fine. The method that I'm advocating is very simple. When you look at a religious practice or belief, you can ask a very basic question, which is there anything in it for me? Now, that's not selfish. That's not a selfish question. What it's trying to do is to connect up the needs of the individual with works of culture, which is an attitude that I think can be practiced across all the arts. It's not rude, it's not trivial, it's not vulgar. I think it's the only way of taking art and culture seriously, to say, what can it do for me? That's the way in which these things assume a place in our hearts, rather than get worn lightly to help us to pass an exam. So the first area that I look at is education. I think religions can teach the secular world all sorts of rather interesting things about the world of education. Now, education is a field that secularists take really seriously. If you think about the government, local government, national governments are always talking about the importance of education. And if you analyze why the secular world thinks education is important, there tend to be two reasons. Firstly, education is important because it's going to help us to acquire the skills that will make capitalism go better. We'll learn to become accountants, brain surgeons, delivery analysts, logistics specialists, whatever it may be, and that's going to help the economy grow. So that's why we need education. But there's another reason why we might need education, and it sometimes creeps in during the more lyrical moments of politicians' speeches or during graduation ceremonies, when you hear sentences like, education makes us more fully human. Education is a route to becoming a full citizen, to becoming a proper adult. Now, I think these lyrical moments they're onto something very important, that education isn't just about technical skills. It's more broadly about learning how to live. The idea that education should help you to learn how to live is a relatively recent one. It really gets its formulation in the middle of the 19th century. And the middle of the 19th century in Western Europe was a fascinating time in relation to religion. A moment occurred when religious attendance fell off a cliff. People simply stopped going to church in large numbers, and a panic ensued. And the panic went like this. People thought, where are citizens going to get moral guidance, consolation, and an ethical framework? Where is this going to come if it's no longer coming from religion? Very valid question. And there was a small group of influential voices in the UK that came up with an answer which I think is very persuasive and interesting, though still sounds a bit weird. I'm thinking of people like Matthew Arnold or John Stuart Mill, and they said, look, once scripture goes, there's one thing that can take its place, and that thing is culture, by which they meant philosophy, history, literature, art, that this storehouse of culture was able to provide all sorts of things that religions had once provided. That here one would be able to find guidance, morality, an ethical framework. When the Gospel of St. John was no longer convincing, you could turn to Plato, you could look at the novels of Jane Austen, you could look at the essays of Montaigne or whatever. Now, this sounds like an odd idea, but I think it's a very valid idea. In fact, it's the idea by which I and many of us live our lives today. That's how we approach culture. But there's a problem. And the problem is that that idea has not been taken very seriously by those who educate us. I mean, let's do a thought experiment. Imagine showing up at any university in Australia or going, even to the best university in the world, Harvard. Let's imagine going to Harvard. And you say, look, I'm here for a simple reason. I'm here because I need an ethical framework, I need moral guidance, and I need to learn how to live and to die. Could you help me? They would be dialing up the ambulance, if not the insane asylum. It's simply not something that our institutions of education think they're in the business of doing. And the reason why they don't is that there's an assumption that once you're past 18 or something, once you're an adult, you don't really need particular help. Of course, there are mentally unsound people, but there are hospitals for them. They don't come to universities and things. They're a small minority. So we don't need to change the curriculum for them. We just need to teach these things because they're very important. Please don't ask why they're important. They're just very, very important. Please don't ask us to make it relevant. Let's just keep it just important like it's always been. So that's the stance of the modern humanities department. Interestingly, because of this continued stance, attendance at the humanities departments is falling off a cliff. Now, this is not at all the starting point of religions. Religions start from the point of view that all of us, not just a minority, all of us are a little bit out of our minds. We are literally, all of us, broken. Broken is a word you find in Catholicism. In Buddhism, an idea that all of us have what the Buddhists call monkey minds. In other words, minds that are all over the place, that can't concentrate, that can't see things clearly. We're all over the shop. All of us are just holding it together, but only just. So what do we need? Well, the first thing we need is guidance. Of course we need guidance. How are we going to cope with falling in love, finding a job, dealing with other people, living in a society, having to deal with the illness and death of our loved ones, and then having to die ourselves? How are we going to get through it? We need help, and we need guidance, and religions are on hand to provide it. Now, I don't necessarily believe a lot of the guidance, the specific guidance that religion brings, but I like the model that perhaps it's going to be a very good idea to have some guidance on hand. This seems deeply important. Think of the way in which religions go about their business. They deliver sermons. The secular world delivers lectures. What's the difference between a lecture and a sermon? Well, a lecture is trying to impart some information, and a sermon is trying to change your life from the view that there probably needs to be something to be changed about, or some area in which you need help. So there's a degree of urgency and didacticism which I find appealing, even though the things that are being taught under the banner of religion are not necessarily, and very often, things that I directly approve of, but the form intrigues me a lot. And I continue to believe that culture should replace Scripture, and that in this act of replacement, the example of how religions function is going to be very important. The other thing, the other area that I think is very good when it comes to religions, the other thing I want to put on my buffet plate, is the way in which religions deliver education. So not just the form of education or the intention, but also the delivery, the tools of delivery. Now, religion starts from the point of view that all of us have minds like sieves. You pour something in and it just flows out very, very quickly. And they don't mean this in an insulting way, it's just their analysis of how humans work. They're indebted in this sense to the analysis first done by the ancient Greeks, that our minds suffer congenitally from what the Greeks called akrasia. Akrasia means weakness of will. What's weakness of will? Well, a weakness of will is basically you know something intellectually, makes total sense, you're buying into it intellectually, but unfortunately you're weak-willed. So when push comes to shove, despite the fact that you believe in kindness and goodness and charity and all the rest of it, actually you're going to be in a really bad mood and you're going to be quite nasty and you're going to walk straight past an opportunity to help things along. Weakness of will dogs us every step of the way. That's what the ancient Greeks believed, and you find this concept right at the heart of most organized religions. So what do you do with the fact you're weak-willed? Well, one of the first things you need to do is repetition. You need to repeat things all the time. The secular world believes that if you have something important to teach somebody, take them in a classroom when they're about 19 and a half, sit them down and just pour in some knowledge, and miraculously it's going to stick there for the next 40 years during a career in management consultancy or whatever. It'll be totally active all the time. Religions think, no, nonsense. If you pour something in at 9 o'clock, by lunchtime it'll be mostly gone, and by supper time you're going to need another top-up. You need to keep going round and round and round. And you know that feeling you get when, in the secular world, when you read a brilliant book and you think, wow, that was amazing, I really want to change my life in relation to this book. Or you see a fantastic film and you think, wow, those emotions, I want to carry them through into my life, to embed them in my life. But of course, by midday the next day, by the time you're having your sandwich for lunch, it's just all gone. Because that's the way we are. So religions know this about us. They look this squarely in the face in the way the secular world doesn't. And it says, right, so we're going to need to keep repeating everything. If something's important, you've got to go back and back and back. The other thing that religions do is they arrange time for us. Now, we believe in arranging time in the world of business. We all have work diaries. Most of adults who are in the workplace will have a diary that chops up every day and that says, this is the acquisitions meeting, that's the sales meeting, that's this meeting, that meeting, at a particular point. Now, all religions also have diaries and calendars, but they're watching out for something else, not money or the social life. They're trying to find a space in time for a variety of psychologically, or if you like, spiritually important moments, so that in the course of a year, we will have regular encounters with those ideas that are most important to us, and they will find a more secure place in our hearts. The secular world thinks, look, if an idea is important, it'll come by. I'll remember it. It'll bubble up. It'll be authentic that way. Don't tell me what to think at any particular point. Religions go, no, nonsense. Even if you want to feel these things, you're going to miss out because there'll be something good on TV, Twitter will go, and you'll abandon that intellectual commitment you might have had to an idea. Take the moon. Now, all of us know that when you look at the moon and when you look up at the stars, good things happen. You're relativized in space. You who can loom quite large in your own imagination. We all take our problems very seriously. We're all in the world of other humans, and which what they say and what they think looms very large. And then occasionally you look up at the moon and you think, wow, the great thing about the moon is it doesn't know anything about me. It doesn't care about me. It's totally indifferent to that squabble I've had, to that struggle I'm having, etc. Its indifference is strangely not humiliating, but a source of comfort, a source of consolation, because in the kind of grand emptiness of space or of time, we find our own anxieties and needs stilled and put against a wider canvas. And so some of the anxiety and egoism and selfishness that's endemic to life in a city starts to lessen. That's why we need nature, that's why we need the stars, we need the moon. Anyway, all religions know about this, which is why they tend to put us in these positions. But they don't only know about this theoretically, they actually put this in the calendar, so that we'll go off and do this stuff rather than just nod our heads sagely at the concept. So if you're a Buddhist, for example, in the middle of September, there's the festival of Tsukimi. And at the festival of Tsukimi, you've got to leave your office or your work, your home, and you go and stand on specially made canonical platforms. You look at the moon, you recite poetry in honor of the fragility of life, the importance of social bonds, and the impermanence of everything made by man, while you're eating some rice cakes and looking at the moon. Charming ritual. Religions have rituals. Now, what is a ritual? A ritual is a communal event that is trying to do something psychological for you, something inner. It's an outer event that is aiming to facilitate an inner change. We don't do rituals very much. If you want to look at something that's really disappeared from the contemporary world, it's ritual. Rituals have disappeared. We have a really hard time doing this because we're obsessed with spontaneity, because we think if something is spontaneous, it's better than if it's ritualized. I sort of agree, except my experience is that if it's always authentic, it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. So religions put things in our diaries. In Judaism, for example, there's a lovely ceremony called Birkat Hilahot, where around the dawn of a new year in springtime, you're asked out by your rabbi to go and stand in a field, and you look at the blossom, the newly made blossom, and you read some passages of the Bible and some poetry in honor of springtime. Now you could say, Wordsworth tells us to do that as well. Problem is, none of us have read Wordsworth since university, and we're constantly forgetting about him. So, putting things in our diary. The other thing that religions know about in terms of education is that if you're trying to convince someone of something, it's not enough just to have some good ideas. You need to deliver them well. Oratory is fundamental to the success of ideas and education in the world. My own hashing up of this is a demonstration of that. We need people who speak well, because otherwise, if someone is speaking in a mediocre way about important things, a crazier is going to kick in. Intellectually, you'll think, yeah, that's good, but it won't convince you. So all religions have an obsession with the art of rhetoric. They teach people how to speak in ways that the secular world just doesn't. If you've ever, the church, the religion that takes this most seriously is probably the Pentecostalists in the southern American states. If any of you have ever been to a service there, it's the most extraordinary thing. You'll get a preacher standing on the stage, and if he says something that people agree with, people will just stand up randomly and go, amen, amen, amen. And at the end of a really good point that's convincing everyone, people will just stand up and cheer and hug and say, thank you, Jesus, thank you, Savior, thank you, Christ. And the whole hall is just in an absolute frenzy, which makes things very, very convincing. Now, of course, when you go to a modern, say, university, everyone's just standing there, taking notes, checking their smartphones. But imagine if, there was a little bit more energy in the talk, and, people stood up and went, thank you, Montaigne, thank you, Plato, thank you, Jane Austen, and there was a real rousing action. Then, you'd know things were moving. But, we're not picking up on that lesson. The other area in which religions do really well to understand human beings is that they understand that humans are not merely brains, that we're not just logical machines in a body, that we are encased within a very powerful body that's full of emotions and full of senses. And if you're trying to teach someone something, it's no use just attacking their reason. You need to touch them through the whole self. So you need to involve the arts of art and architecture and music and food and smell. You need to involve everything, which is why religions are involved in so many different activities that in secular education are quite weird. I mean, secular education is totally divorced from music, from the arts, from smell. Imagine a university lecturer who lit up some smells in the corner and said, look, this is part of what I'm trying to do. My teaching will go better. Or who said, look, I'm going to rip up this classroom because this classroom is not helping the point I'm trying to make. I'm going to remake and I'm going to get some architects in because, if the classroom is right, then my ideas will be right. This would be very weird. We believe in a separation between the aesthetic and sensory realm and the intellectual realm. Let's say the Buddhists don't at all. Take the lovely Zen Buddhist tea ceremony. Now, Buddhism spends a lot of time talking about friendship and impermanence and fragility, but it doesn't just deliver lectures on this. It invents rituals that involve the senses. So in something like the Zen Buddhist tea ceremony, a beverage has been invited to support a philosophical lesson. There are sort of synesthesic connections between the tea and the lesson, and both are supporting one another in a way that makes both of them seem more plausible and raises their impact. You find this in all religions. In Judaism, for example, Judaism spends a lot of time talking about forgiveness, but it doesn't, again, just deliver talks about forgiveness. It gives us stuff to do that helps the process of forgiveness along. So Orthodox Jewish communities all have at their center a mikveh, which is a ritual bath where every week, every Friday, you atone for your sins, you discuss what you've done wrong, you admit what you've done wrong, you make promises about how you'd like to live in the week ahead, and then you plunge yourself from head to toe in some water. You have a bath. So you do a little bit of forgiveness, then you have a bath. Now, we all know from our own experiences of bathing that bathing is quite an important thing. Important things happen when we're bathing. But on the whole, in the secular world, we don't take them seriously enough. The prime justification for bathing in the modern world is to get clean. Now, that's not necessarily the deepest associations we could have around bathing. Religions know that our contact with water can be accompanied by all sorts of inner psychological changes which we should harness and use, and we tend not to. Okay, moving on now. one area that I want to look at is the world of art. Now, religions are very involved in art. And part of the reason they're so involved is they think that something's got to look really good before it becomes convincing. All religions, to some extent or other, hold this, believe this. And that's why religious art and architecture has been so astonishing down the ages. Religions always knew that you need to have the phone numbers of the leading artists, choreographers, clothes designers, etc., in the vicinity if you want to get your message across. In the secular world, we've got a real division. In one corner, we've got the ideas people. They're in the ivory tower, writing books, etc. And on the other hand, we've got the kind of beauty people, and they do interior design, and they design hats and clothes and shoes and make music and things like this. But the two are not kind of talking. It would be very odd for a philosopher to commission a fashion designer to design some clothes that would help the message along, or to commission a pop star to create a song that would help something along. That's precisely what religions are doing all the time. They are connecting the sensory with the intellectual in order to make it go better. And my problem with a lot of contemporary humanist associations is they've forgotten that. I remember a few years ago looking at the British Humanist website, and I logged on, and one of the first things I thought was, I think a child has made this website, because it didn't look very nice. And then I clicked on, they offer celebrants if someone has died, or if you want to get married, etc. You click on a picture, etc. And then two other things struck me. I thought, wow, these people are really badly dressed. And secondly, I thought, that they can't really write very well. There's about 5 spelling mistakes in the first few paragraphs. Now, I'm not being superficial, and I'm not merely being cynical. This is a serious point, and the point is there had not been a proper appreciation of the aesthetic as a tool in the intellectual and moral. This is something that religions don't forget. Whether it's Buddhism or Islam or Judaism or Christianity, etc. It's right in there. You've got to have the finest words, the finest systems of kind of aesthetic delivery. Now, you could say that in the modern world, we're not short of investment in the arts. After all, there are museums, new museums sprouting up all the time. And you sometimes hear it said, indeed, that museums are our new cathedrals, our new churches. They're the places where it's quiet, you go there, you have a reverent moment, etc., our new churches. Now, I'd like to believe that, and I think that art has got that power potentially, but I think that ambition, that very good ambition, has been undermined by some doctrines that reign in the world of art, in the world of museum culture particularly, and that get in the way of releasing what I think is the true, full power of works of art to guide, inspire, console, and just help us to be fully human. Those two ideas. The first idea is the notion that art should be for art's sake. A very popular idea, first devised in the 19th century, the idea that art should not be overly connected to life. Art is living in its own world, the aesthetic world, and it shouldn't get too dirty. It shouldn't muddle itself with politics, with stuff of everyday life. It exists in that privileged realm of art. The other thing the other kind of piece of ideology that reigns around art is the notion that if a work of art is good, it's a little bit mysterious. Ambiguity, a lack of explanation is seen as a real hallmark of a quality work of art. You know what I mean, those catalogues in museums that you sometimes get, and you read the catalogue and you think, what? I don't understand anything. Indeed, very often, the dominant mode of the dominant response of nice people like you when you go to a contemporary art gallery is, what's wrong with me? I just didn't really understand that. And that's it feels like a personal response, but really it's an institutional response that stems from the idea, it's a modernist idea, that good art is ambiguous. Now, religions will have nothing to do with either of these two concepts, and it's interesting to think about. Religions argue that there's a very simple point that art is for. Art is to help us to lead a good life, on the one hand, and on the other, it's there to warn us against a bad way of life. It's there to inspire and to exhort, and also to warn us away from things, draw us away from things. Very simple mission. In other words, art is moral. Art wants something of you. Art wants to change your life and the life of your society. I think that's a very good ambition, but one that contemporary society is oddly conflicted about. We both want to assert the huge importance of art, and yet we're a little bit reluctant to say exactly on what basis that importance might be founded. Not at all the case of religious art. Take something like Rembrandt's Christ crossing the Sea of Galilee. Now, what's that a painting about? It's very simple. It's a piece of propaganda on behalf of the Christian church in defense of the virtue of courage. It's reminding you of what courage is. We all know what courage is intellectually. Intellectually, we go, oh, yeah, courage. Yeah, it's important to be courageous. Yeah, I'd like to try and have a bit of courage in my life. And, it seems really obvious. It's one of those things like love. Yeah, it's good to be love, nice, all that kind of stuff. The thing is that these are empty, banal cliches until you come across a great work of art, a fantastic song, or a brilliant painting, or a brilliant film, and you go, my goodness, that's what courage feels like, or that's what being nice is, or that's what love is. It hits you in the senses, and it makes a sterile intellectual idea come to life. And that's why religions know that we need not just the intellectual stuff, but the colourful sensory art form. I mentioned the word propaganda a minute ago. Now, propaganda is one of the scariest words in the modern world, because as soon as we hear the word propaganda, we're not far away from thinking of Hitler and Stalin. Now, there's a slippery slope, and they are at the bottom, these guys, but I want us to hang on in the middle of that slippery slope, because I think we can. There's a space. I think there's nothing wrong with propaganda when it's propaganda on behalf of nice things. People will say, what are nice things? Who are you to tell me what a nice thing is? Well, let's make a shopping list that I think people won't disagree with. Love, kindness to children, generosity towards the elderly, care of the community, equality, fairness, justice, a society where everyone can be fulfilled. These are the things we all believe in. We sometimes are told we don't believe in anything nowadays. We live in a postmodern vacuum. Nonsense. We can all rally around these values. I think that an art form that made propaganda for this and was unembarrassed about this would help us to make ideas which can, on a bad day, just feel like limp cliches, give them a bit of life and give them traction in our lives. For the very same reasons, religions believe in architecture. If you want to convince someone of something, you can't just put them in a really ugly building. You need architecture to work with you to make a point. There are some buildings that are so ugly that they make you feel that life is just a cruel joke and you might as well just give up. And then there are other buildings which, even if you're having a bad day, the building seems to be whispering to you, come on, it's all right, it's going to be okay. There's resources. We'll get through this. Essentially, the building is telling you that. Buildings divide into that. Now, in the modern secular world, we abandon construction almost always to property developers. And their prime impulse is, of course, to make money. And that's why most buildings are hideous. And most buildings make us feel, on the whole, that life is a hopeless, depressing process. But every now and then, someone puts up a building that seems to be offering hope. Many of these buildings are religious buildings, and people who like nothing to do with religion and who are committed atheists will tend to admit, those religious guys, they're pretty good on the buildings. And I think, my feeling as an atheist who loves architecture, let's learn something from this. Are we really going to end up with a sterile system whereby on the one hand you've got the property developers doing their hideous towers, and on the other hand you've got these fantastic Buddhist temples, etc. But that's it? That's on the menu? Because a lot of us are going to think, look, I can't really hang out in a Buddhist temple for a long time. I mean, at some point I'm going to realize, no, I'm an atheist. I'm not part of Buddhism, etc. So where's one to go? And I advocate in the book that we think about using the tremendous resources of contemporary architects to create spaces that do some of the things that religious spaces do. Religious spaces are very good, for example, at allowing us to get away from the hubbub of daily life and finding perspective. They would say spaces in which we can talk to God. I don't speak that kind of language. I would say spaces in which we can speak to the most important bits of ourselves. Relatively close, quite some similarities. Now, we need some of these spaces. And where are they? People say, well, what about the library or the gym? It's not quite there. So, okay, The other thing to bear in mind about religions that seems important is they are organized. They are institutions. And we can sometimes forget this because people who want to attack religions will often write a book. And they'll feel terribly proud and they'll deliver lectures and write a book. I'm thinking of my friend from North Oxford, Richard Dawkins. They'll write books and they'll think, right, that's the way to attack religion. And you want to go, look, however many books you sell, it's not going to convince most people. And the reason is that your so-called enemy doesn't just write books. They're doing everything. They're doing buildings, they're doing songs, they're doing schools, they're doing the whole thing. And you think you're going to come along with a book and the whole thing's going to fall down? Of course not. It doesn't work like that. So, if you're having a serious crack, either at attacking religion or learning from religion or being inspired by the example of religion, think about organization. In the modern world, people who are interested in the soul side of the human being, I'm not thinking religiously, literally just the inner self, the complex self, the bit that isn't just eating and sleeping and chatting, the deep self, right? The people who are interested in the deep self are on the whole in cottage industries. They tend to be lone practitioners. I'm thinking of the poet in his bedroom, me in my bedroom, the guy playing the guitar, the filmmaker, the psychotherapist in their little room, etc. The people who are interested in the care of the modern soul are lone practitioners, and they are incredibly weak and fragmented, and that's why they don't really change very much. Little moment of confession here. They're very individual. Now, religions are well organized. They are multinational, they are disciplined, and they've got a lot of money. $97 billion the Catholic Church pulled in last year. People sometimes go, why is Catholicism still so popular? The ideas are so strange, they make no sense. And you want to go, what about that money? It's helping things along. So it's very well organized. Now, there are some really organized things in the world nowadays, and they're called multinational corporations. And there are enormous similarities between multinational corporations and religions. They're both interested in branding, they're both interested in operating in a variety of countries. Their workforces are disciplined, they have uniforms, they have set things to say to their customers at particular moments, etc. But of course, the really big difference is, McDonald's and Catholicism, is that McDonald's is involved in the care of your body at a most basic level. And this is what multinationals tend to be involved in. They're involved in selling us hamburgers and shoes and cement and hair dryers and that sort of stuff. Whereas, of course, religions are involved in the soul space. So we've got this weird thing. On the one hand, we've got corporations, very powerful, disciplined, multinational, but dealing with the hamburger side of life. On the other hand, you've got very well-organized religions, really like corporations, dealing with the soul stuff, but for a secular person, for an atheist, a lot of what they're saying doesn't seem that plausible, doesn't seem that, that convincing. And then you've got, the guys in their bedrooms. So my message to the guys in their bedrooms is, get out of your bedrooms, some extent, and take a leaf from both the multinationals and the religions. If you're trying to change the world, get organized. We have this very powerful romantic idea that organizations are bad because we might meet other people, and those other people might have souls that are less fine and special than us. We might have to make compromises. We might have to read a spreadsheet, all these horrible things. So we don't really want to do that. So let's stay alone and just write poetry. Problem is, we're going to be weak and disorganized, and our voice will get lost in the hubbub. We've got to have a voice that's going to be as loud as CNN and Sky, etc. So and the Catholic Church. Okay, moving on. Only a few minutes. Let me end with a few things. Okay, another thing that religions are really good at doing is creating communities. Now, the modern world is a lonely place. I'm a lonely person. Not that I'd have no one to see, but I very frequently feel disconnected from the mass of the people that I'm living among. I live in a huge city, as you do, and yet the opportunities for coming together with strangers and turning strangers into friends is limited. Religions are fantastic at doing this. On a regular basis, once a week or so, they'll take a group of people in a particular spot and they'll say, right, in this space, it's okay to suggest that you're a nice person. Most of the time in life, you've got to walk around with a very stern air, look very busy, quite, a little bit grumpy. That's the way to look at. Don't talk to anyone else, etc. Now, for once a week, you can actually be the human being that all of us are. You can give room to the sociability that is in all of us, deep down, and that sociability is made safe. And how does that happen? It happens because there is a good host. Now, for anything to work well in a community, you need a good host. Let's start with a party. In England, I think it doesn't happen so much in Australia, but in England there are parties with really bad hosts where things go like this. Everybody's like this with a drink, and everybody's like that, and no one's talking. Literally, no one's talking, and it's painful. And then someone suggests putting up the music so you don't hear the silence. That happens a lot. But then sometimes, often it's Australians living in the UK, someone is a good host. Someone is a good host, and they go, look, you can meet so-and-so, and you can meet so-and-so, and you're single, and you're interested in science, and suddenly everybody's talking, and it's a community. And what that's required is the host. Now, religions are hosts, essentially. For all the talk of God and the supernatural, etc., at the level of community, the reason why they work is they have a host function. We don't do it. We tend to think, okay, well, maybe social media will solve all this. Because if I join a group that's interested in Canadian ice hockey, I'll meet other people in the world who are interested in Canadian ice hockey, and then we'll have a little community, and that's really great. The difference between social media and the kind of communal organization of religions is that religions say, look, we're going to gather a group of people who've got nothing in common. They won't have any shared interest at all. They won't have ticked any of the same like boxes. But the point is, they'll be united by one thing. They're all human beings. And that the journey that the host organization wants to take us on is turning people who look scary, weird, their skin color's different, they're taller, smaller, shorter, uglier, more beautiful, richer, poorer than we are, and to turn that person into a human being, to see the humanity in what looks like strangeness. That is the spiritual journey of religions. Again, something we're really, really bad at doing, and I think we need to learn to get better. Okay. I'm going to stop it there, but really what I want to do is, what I want to sum up for you is, that's just a brief tour through the buffet. There's a lot else, but what I want to really suggest to you is that there are all sorts of things in religions which are of interest to people who don't believe anything. If you're in communal organization, look at how religions do it. If you're in the world of art, look deeply at what museums, what churches and mosques and temples are up to. If you're in education, look at how religions teach us. Ultimately, I think that religions are far too complex, wise, interesting, full of richness to be abandoned simply to those who happen to believe in them. That would seem a real shame. They're for all of us, especially for non-believers like myself among us. Thank you very much.
The reason I'm on the stage to do this as well is so that we can play good cop, bad cop, or in fact good philosopher, bad cop. I'm going to be trying to move you on fairly quickly, so there's time for as many of you as possible. So once you get up to the microphone, I can't even see what I'm looking at here, to be honest. Anyone at all? Over here.
You mentioned that religions are very good in the realm of education with repetition. So, for example, if you consider something like compassion, they're always banging on about it. I was just wondering if you could answer for me whether you think that has actually worked for them.
Has it worked for religions? Look, the counter-argument to all this is to say, clearly, nothing that religions do works, because there are paedophile priests, and there's the Inquisition, and there's the way that the Spanish behaved when they got to South America, etc., etc. So none of this works. I think that we can't really be scientific about this, and we shouldn't attempt to be. We all have empirical evidence of people who are living without any knowledge of anything to do with religion, who are leading extremely noble and good lives, and vice versa. Nevertheless, I would like to suggest that whenever you see somebody who is living well, they have elements of this. They are recognizing that they need some reminders of things. They probably remind themselves. They probably look for perspective. They probably look for some of the things that naturally occur in world religions. Because I don't think that anyone is born totally good and totally kind and totally compassionate. It takes a bit of work to get there. And whether that work is done under the aegis of religion or under the aegis of literature or psychotherapy or just listening to your mum or your grandmother, whatever it happens to be, but something needs to come along to coalesce the kind of benevolent sides of human nature. So all in all, do I think it works? I think it can help a lot. in some areas with some people. But we're talking here, and this is the great frustration of people like you and I who want stuff to work, right? I had this when I talked about architecture, and I made a case. I kept saying, look, architecture is important. And then when I gave talks on this, there would always be someone in the audience going, but what about the fact that Hitler loved architecture? It would always be the Hitler and architecture and art moment. To which my answer was always this. I would say that art and architecture and religions in their best moments are suggestions. They are not orders, they are not magic bullets, they're not like pills. If you take a pill, you might not believe in paracetamol, but you don't need to believe in paracetamol. It just works on your body. These are suggestions that require the assent of the conscious mind. And so you do get these paradoxical situations where a priest who talks about love turns out to be a bully and a monster. Somebody who loves a Bach cantata and a building by Palladio turns out to have fun murdering children. These are deeply paradoxical moments, but I don't think we should ever come to the conclusion that, so in that case the whole thing's baloney. That's not the point. These are useful suggestions, very important suggestions, and on the whole, on a good day, they do work, and that's why we should keep going with them.
Over this side here.
I think it's kind of in the same vein. Do you ever find yourself, even now with the ideas that you're proposing, find yourself in that kind of vein, a very Hitchen-esque anger at religion and what religion does and the idea that it poisons everything that you mentioned? Do you still feel those kinds of emotions at religion even now? And what do you do when you're in those kinds of situations to actually get past that?
Look, that's a really interesting question, because I've observed, particularly with the publication of this book, that there are some people who don't just think religion is wrong. They think it's evil, they think it's poison, they think it poisons everything, etc. And they're often very angry. I mean, I've had emails and things from people saying things like, you have betrayed atheism. You have come too close. You've said too many things that are a bit too nice about religion. And so you can now no longer be an atheist. And things like that. So the debate is heated. Look, I think it's, I don't know, I don't want to be patronizing because I don't know, but I suspect that a lot of this anger is to do with people who've been traumatized by religion at some point in their life. They might literally have been physically traumatized. They might have had something in them killed or nearly killed at the hands of something religious, something important, and they are angry and they're militant, and perhaps they have every right to be. But at the same time, there are other people like myself who have had the privilege to grow up in a world where nothing bad ever happened to me at the hands of religion. I grew up in Britain, one of the most tolerant countries at the level of religion ever invented. This is the country that applauded the Life of Brian when it was made. Religion is kind of at the Life of Brian level in the UK. Religion is kind of a joke. It's like a sort of friendly joke in the corner. But obviously, if you're a woman who grows up in Saudi Arabia, you're going to find laughter a little bit more challenging. And I really accept that, but I'd also invite those who do feel very angry, do feel that religion poisons everything, to recognize that maybe, even though it poisoned everything for them, there are other people, perhaps in their own societies or in societies nearby, who will not have had that experience and who will be able to take a slightly different view and a more benevolent view of aspects of religion.
Up on the balcony.
Oh, I can't hold. Oh, all right, fair enough. I've got my own microphone stand. Good evening.
Evening.
Your friend from the north, Oxford, Richard Dawkins, started to organise and called himself the Brights. And Christopher Hitchens, God rest his soul, when he heard of this, wanted to disassociate himself from this organisation of the Brights and so on. And I just wanted your opinion on this thought. If we sort of organise and so on, is this not becoming like a religion in and of itself, which is what Hitchens was kind of concerned about?
Yeah.
Can I hear your thoughts on this?
Absolutely. I think one of the fascinating things that's happened is that atheists have started to divide, and the division is between a very hardcore and a softer movement. I'm at the softer end, but let me give you the sort of, the hardcore believes that everything to do with religion is utterly poisonous from beginning to end, and that a lot of things that an atheist might do could start to smack of religion. And it might be something as simple as getting people in a room and singing a song together. That might start to smell a bit religious. So let me give you a concrete example. Richard Dawkins, a few years ago, decided to do these things that he called nature trails, where he invited people to go for walks in the countryside to look at nature and to use nature as a resource for putting things in perspective and appreciate. Anyway, a lovely, touching idea, one of these nature trails. This became an unbelievable problem for another faction within atheism, such a problem that Dawkins has since disassociated himself entirely with the nature trail movement. He won't go on anything, although it's really sort of almost Jesuitical at this point. I was sent an email by somebody who goes that secretly he's still funding them, and that they go on. But look, it's funny, but it's sad as well, because what it's showing is intolerance, and there is that comedic thing that sometimes atheists will go, you must be tolerant, you must be skeptical and allow room for doubt. And you're thinking, oh, wow, the tone in which you said that made me a little bit questioning whether that was really your intention. So fundamentalism roams across human disciplines, and it can find a home under all ideologies, weirdly, even those ideologies that are ostensibly committed to free inquiry.
Up in the gods.
Firstly, thanks for being my Facebook friend.
Thank you.
Secondly, sport seems to be something that unites Australia. Do you think you could classify sport as a religion?
Look, there are lots of things that unite people. I mean, not just sport, but all kinds of things. Going for a walk or having a dog unites people, or liking to cook French food or Italian food. These things all unite people. I guess the religious answer to this, and I'm not committed to this, but let's just give what the religious answer to this would be. The religious answer would be, we're not trying to gather people around any old thing, particularly a narrow concern like, the exercise of the body. You're trying to get people to gather around the vaguest, biggest, but most important thing, which is we're all human. And the more the gathering is around something abstract and big like that, the nobler it is. You see, because you start to exclude. I mean, if you go, look, all of us Australians are really, really big on a community based around sport. I bet there are Australians a bit like me, nerds, who actually really don't like sport very much and get a bit scared. Yeah,
I don't think there's anyone like that in this room.
No. I think this has turned into a confessional. We could go deep into this. But, I'm sure there's like the Australian guy who, likes a bit of swimming, but only a bit, and wants to rush back to their towel and, all of that. So I'm sure this exists. And if you're telling them, hey, Australians, it's a country that loves sport, how are they going to feel? It's like, oh, wow. So that means A, I'm not human, and B, I'm not an Australian. So, all because I don't like swimming very much. So, I think we have to be careful about these pseudo gatherings around things because they quickly become tribal. And I think the noblest, the moments when you really are swimming in the sea of humanity is when the entry level is not fantastic swimmer or Australian or, belongs to this hockey club or whatever. But the entrance requirement is human, being human. Oh, right, you're a human, fine, join our group. When it's like that, that's true community. Now, obviously, religions themselves don't go there. And in their most hideous moments, they will say, oh, you are not of our precise denomination. You have not taken this version of holy orders or eaten that biscuit or drunk that thing at the right moment. So out with you. And that's religion at its most tribal and its most hideous. But in its more generous moments, and its most generous moments in all the faiths, there are moments when they go, look, the finest thing is to show hospitality to all and community with all.
We'll take one more question from up on the balcony.
Hi, Alain.
Hi.
Your lecture presupposes some degree of voluntary engagement in either religion or atheism or whichever franchise you subscribe to. Some recent studies have suggested that religion or any set of beliefs is actually a function of an over-enlarged limbic system in the base of the brain. what is your view with respect to whether religion or any franchise is just a genetic mutation and none of us actually have any choice about where we belong?
Look, my starting point is not with religion or atheism at all. My starting point is with the individual who lives and suffers and dies. That's my starting point. It's my starting point in all my work. And what I'm interested in is the possible resources that an ordinary, suffering, loving, hoping human can find out there in the world. And one of those resources is religion. But there are other secular varieties, as I say, in the works of culture, in the words of our friends, etc. All of these things are important to a good life. So I'm still not quite getting you on the limbic system, but let me end by saying that it's really up to all of us to deal with the problems of everyday life by those resources that are out there. There are resources, there are ways in which our own experiences can be illuminated by the thinking of other people. That's what it is to be part of an intellectual or psychological community. It's got nothing to do with attending a fancy university or anything. Ultimately, it's got to say, I want to find other voices that can teach me things about stuff I feel that I'm not getting from just going out for dinner with friends. That's the commitment that's at the root of my life, to try and find some of these voices that can do that illuminating work. And for this book, I found some of these voices in the work of religion, even though, paradoxically, I happen not to believe in any religions. That's my point for today. Thank you so much, all of you, for coming. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you, Melbourne.
This is Big Ideas on ABC TV.